December 27, 1941, 8:48 a.m., Vaagso Island, Norway. Captain John Malcolm Thorpe, Fleming Churchill crouched in the landing craft, gripping his basket-hilted claymore broadsword as German machine gun fire ripped through the dawn mist. 20 meters to shore. Standard doctrine said commandos should use suppressive fire during beach assaults. Churchill had other plans. In the next 4 hours, he would prove every military expert wrong about what wins close-quarters combat. His unit would destroy 11 German positions, sink 8 ships, and eliminate over 100 enemy soldiers. German commanders would report psychological shock they had never witnessed before. British soldiers charging with medieval weapons and bagpipes. This is the story of how one man's insane weapons revolutionized commando tactics and terrified the Wehrmacht from Norway to Italy. If stories of courage and ingenuity move you, please like and subscribe. Every subscription helps us honor the memories of those who served. John Churchill grew up in Hong Kong and Ceylon, where his father served in the colonial civil service. Born 1906, upper middle class, educated at King William's College and Sandhurst. But Churchill rejected traditional officer restraint. He was an aggressive maverick who believed fear was the most effective weapon in warfare. When war erupted in September 1939, Churchill was serving with the Manchester Regiment. He volunteered for the newly formed Commandos in July 1940, attracted by their mission: hit-and-run raids requiring unconventional thinking and extreme aggression. His commanding officers at Achnacarry Training Camp in Scotland called his broadsword theatrical nonsense. Churchill demonstrated its effectiveness by beheading practice dummies in under 2 seconds. The blade intimidated, disoriented, and killed silently. He arrived at the Special Service Brigade headquarters in Largs, Scotland in October 1941. Number 3, Commando was preparing for Operation Archery, a daylight raid on Vaagso, a small Norwegian coastal town held by German garrison forces. The objective was to destroy fish oil factories, sink shipping, and prove British commandos could strike anywhere along Hitler's Atlantic Wall. Churchill brought his claymore. He brought his longbow with armor-piercing arrows. He brought his bagpipes. His fellow officers thought he was insane. Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater, commanding 3 Commando, initially refused to let Churchill carry the sword ashore. Churchill argued that psychological impact mattered more than firepower in close combat. Durnford Slater reluctantly approved. "If you die with that thing, Churchill, don't expect sympathy." Churchill smiled. He had no intention of dying. Commando raids in 1941 had achieved mixed results. The June 1941 raid on Kirkenes, Norway, ended in disaster with 40% casualties. The September raid on the Channel Islands accomplished nothing. Combined Operations Headquarters in London analyzed the failures and found a troubling pattern. Commandos were fighting like regular infantry, relying on suppressive fire and grenades. They were not exploiting their primary advantage: psychological shock. German coastal garrisons expected conventional British tactics. Wehrmacht defensive doctrine emphasized disciplined return fire and counterattack. German soldiers trained to respond to British infantry assaults with coordinated machine gun and mortar fire. The manual said, "Maintain defensive positions, suppress enemy fire, call for reinforcements." This worked against conventional forces. Lieutenant Peter Martin, 22, Manchester, December 12, 1941. Operation Anklet, Lofoten Islands, Norway. His unit assaulted a German strongpoint using standard fire and maneuver tactics. Germans responded with immediate counterfire. Martin was hit 3 times by MG-34 fire before reaching the German position. He bled out on the beach in 4 minutes. Churchill had served with Martin at Achnacarry. They had trained together on the assault course. Martin was competent, aggressive, well-trained. He followed doctrine perfectly. The problem wasn't training or courage. The problem was predictability. Germans knew exactly what British commandos would do. They could prepare, they could respond, they could kill. Churchill studied after-action reports from failed raids. Every report mentioned the same thing. German defenders maintained discipline under fire. They did not panic. They executed defensive procedures. British commandos were essentially fighting conventional infantry battles against fortified positions. The tactical advantage of surprise lasted about 30 seconds. After that, Germans controlled the engagement. The problem wasn't equipment, it wasn't training. It was psychological impact. Commandos needed to create chaos so complete that German defensive doctrine became irrelevant. Churchill saw the gap in German thinking. They prepared for British infantry tactics developed in World War I trenches. They had no preparation for an enemy that fought like it was 1415 Agincourt. Within specifications meant predictable. Predictable meant vulnerable. Churchill decided to become unpredictable. The night after Martin's death, Churchill sat in the operations room at Largs studying German defensive manuals captured during earlier raids. Wehrmacht doctrine was comprehensive, detailed, methodical, every contingency covered, every British tactic anticipated. Except one category had no procedures: psychological warfare using archaic weapons. German soldiers trained to face rifles, grenades, machine guns. They understood suppressive fire. They understood flanking maneuvers. They had zero training for what to do when a sword-wielding officer charges while someone plays bagpipes. The manual had no section on medieval weapons response procedures. Churchill developed his theory. The human brain processes unexpected threats differently than expected ones. German soldiers could respond to British rifle fire automatically because they had trained for it thousands of times. But confronting a broadsword created cognitive disruption. The soldier's brain had to process, "This is not in my training. What do I do?" That 2-second delay was lethal. Standard commando doctrine: land under covering fire, advance using fire and maneuver, suppress enemy positions, assault with grenades. Time to German response: 5 to 10 seconds. Churchill's approach: land with maximum noise, bagpipes, charge immediately with sword visible, close distance before Germans could process the threat, engage in close combat where medieval weapons had advantage over rifles with 24-inch barrels. December 18, 1941. Achnacarry training exercise. Churchill requested permission to test his theory against a simulated German position. The exercise was designed to evaluate different assault tactics. Churchill's team would attack using his method. Another team would use standard doctrine. The German defenders were experienced instructors who knew every commando tactic. They positioned themselves behind sandbag walls with Lee Enfield rifles loaded with blanks. Standard team approached using fire and maneuver. Germans responded with immediate return fire. Exercise lasted 4 minutes. Standard team successfully assaulted the position but took casualties from defensive fire. Churchill's team approached differently. Churchill himself led, carrying his sword, while Corporal Morrison played bagpipes at maximum volume. They charged straight at the position, covering 70 meters in 12 seconds. The defending instructors froze, not because of fear, because their brains could not process what they were seeing. By the time they recovered and aimed their rifles, Churchill's team was inside the position engaging with bayonets and sword. Exercise supervisor: "What the bloody hell was that?" Churchill: "That was terror. Germans will freeze just like your men did." the supervisor reported to Combined Operations. Churchill's unorthodox approach achieved complete surprise and resulted in 0 attacking casualties during assault phase. Recommend approval for operational testing. Churchill had his authorization. Vaagso would be the test. December 26, 1941, 10 p.m. HMS Kenya, Norwegian Sea, approaching Vaagso Island. Captain Churchill stood in the briefing room with 51 officers and 525 men of No. 3 Commando and No. 4 Commando. Lieutenant Colonel Durnford Slater reviewed the plan. Vaagso has approximately 250 German defenders from the 181st Infantry Division, 4 shore batteries. Fish oil factories are the primary targets. We destroy production capacity, sink transport ships, capture prisoners for intelligence, withdraw before German reinforcements arrive from Bergen. Naval gunfire will begin at 8:45, landing at 8:48. Estimate 6 hours shore time maximum. Churchill requested permission to lead Group 3's assault on the main German strongpoint at the south edge of town. I want the hardest position, sir. Durnford Slater nodded. You get the German headquarters building and the Ulvesoon Hotel strong point. Estimated 40 Germans, fortified positions, machine guns. Perfect. Churchill checked his claymore. 38 inches of steel, basket hilt, perfectly balanced. He had sharpened it that afternoon. His bow and quiver of arrows were secured. Corporal Morrison had the bagpipes ready. 8:30 a.m. Churchill descended to the landing craft. Time to prove his theory. 8:40 a.m. landing craft engines roared. Churchill stood in the bow, sword visible, watching the Norwegian coastline emerge from the morning darkness. Vaagso was a small fishing town built along the narrow strait between the island and mainland. German positions visible as concrete structures and sandbagged emplacements. 8:45 a.m. HMS Kenya opened fire. 6-inch naval shells screamed overhead, impacting German positions. Explosions erupted across the waterfront. Smoke and fire. The bombardment was designed to suppress defenders and create chaos. Perfect conditions for landing. 8:47 a.m. Churchill turned to his men. Remember, move fast, make noise, show them the sword. They will freeze. When they freeze, you kill them. 1 minute to beach. 8:48 a.m. Landing craft hit the beach. Ramp dropped. Churchill leaped out, sword raised, screaming a Highland war cry. Morrison behind him playing the March of the Cameron Men on bagpipes at maximum volume. 23 men of Group 3 charged behind them. German MG-34 position, 60 meters ahead, opened fire. Tracers ripped across the beach. Standard doctrine said, drop, find cover, suppress the machine gun, flank. Churchill ran straight at it. Full sprint. Sword held overhead. Morrison playing bagpipes while running. The visual was insane. A British officer in combat gear charging a machine gun position with a medieval sword while someone played music. The German gunner stopped firing. For 2 seconds, he stared. His brain could not process what he was seeing. This was not in training. This was not in the manual. This was impossible. 2 seconds was enough. Churchill covered 30 meters. The gunner recovered, swung the MG-34 toward Churchill, but Churchill was already diving into the position. The sword came down. The gunner died without firing another shot. Churchill's men assaulted the position from both sides. 3 Germans dead in 8 seconds. Churchill pulled the sword free. Group 3, advance, make noise. They charged into Vaagso town. German defenders were emerging from buildings, preparing defensive positions. They heard bagpipes echoing through the streets. They saw British soldiers running toward them with bayonets fixed and an officer wielding a sword. Wehrmacht defensive doctrine had no procedures for this. The psychological impact was immediate. German soldiers hesitated. They expected British troops to use cover, to advance carefully, to suppress positions with fire before assaulting. This was the opposite. This was aggressive, chaotic, terrifying. Several Germans fired wildly without aiming. Others retreated into buildings. Churchill led Group 3 straight into the town center. The sword was visible in every engagement. Germans saw it and froze. That moment of cognitive disruption was fatal. British commandos closed the distance and engaged at ranges where German rifles were ineffective. German defensive discipline began breaking down immediately. 9:03 a.m. Ulvesun Hotel converted into German headquarters. Fortified position. Machine guns covering approaches. Estimated 15 Germans inside. Standard assault would require grenades through windows, suppressive fire, coordinated entry. Churchill approached from the side street. German sentry on the corner saw him coming. The sentry raised his Kar 98K rifle. Churchill was 40 meters away. The sentry should have fired immediately. But Churchill was running toward him with a sword. The sentry's brain registered, "Officer? Sword? Charging? Not possible?" He hesitated. Churchill closed to 20 meters. Drew his longbow. The sentry recovered, aimed. Churchill released. The arrow covered 20 meters in 0.4 seconds. Penetrated the sentry's chest below the sternum. The sentry collapsed. Churchill reached the hotel door. No time for reconnaissance. He kicked it open and charged inside screaming. 5 Germans in the lobby. They turned toward the door, saw a British officer with a sword running at them. Complete cognitive disruption. 3 Germans froze. 2 tried to raise rifles. Churchill's men were immediately behind him, firing. The 2 Germans who attempted to fight were shot. The 3 who froze were bayoneted before they could recover. Stairway led to the second floor. Churchill took stairs 3 at a time. More Germans above. Someone shouted in German, "Was ist das?" What is that? Churchill emerged onto the second floor. Corridor. 4 doors. Germans firing from rooms. Churchill threw a grenade into the first room. Explosion. Rushed the second room before the Germans inside could react to the grenade blast. Sword first. The German inside was facing the doorway with rifle raised, but when he saw the sword, his eyes widened. Quarter-second delay. Churchill's sword found his throat. Third room. German officer attempting to organize defense. Churchill crashed through the door. The officer turned, reached for his Luger. Churchill's blade severed his hand before the pistol cleared the holster. The officer screamed. Churchill's men secured the room. 9:08 a.m. Hotel cleared. 11 Germans dead. 0 British casualties. Time elapsed. 5 minutes. 9:15 a.m. German counterattack forming at the warehouse district, southern edge of town. Wehrmacht defensive doctrine was reasserting itself. German NCOs were rallying troops, organizing coordinated defense. Approximately 30 Germans behind cargo containers and warehouse walls. Machine gun position covering the approach street. Standard British response. Suppress with rifle fire. Call for mortar support. Flank the position. Time required, 15 to 20 minutes. Churchill's response. Group 3, advance to contact. Morrison, play. The bagpipes resumed. Churchill led the advance down the main street directly toward the German position. Germans saw them coming. This time, they were prepared. The MG-34 opened fire. Bullets impacted the street. Churchill's men took cover behind building corners. Churchill did not stop. He ran at the German position alone, sword raised, screaming. The German machine gunner tracked him, fired, missed. Churchill was sprinting, moving unpredictably, and the gunner's brain was screaming, "This is insane! Why is he not taking cover?" The cognitive disruption affected aim. Missed again. Churchill closed to 30 meters. Threw a smoke grenade. White smoke obscured the street. Germans lost visual. Churchill disappeared into the smoke, emerged 10 meters from the machine gun nest. The gunner saw him too late. Churchill's sword penetrated the gunner's chest between the fourth and fifth ribs. The gunner collapsed. Group 3 assaulted through the smoke. Germans in the warehouse district were disoriented. The smoke, the bagpipes, the British commandos charging with bayonets, and reports of a British officer with a sword created complete chaos. German defensive discipline collapsed. Some Germans fled. Others surrendered. Churchill captured 12 Germans who were too shocked to fight. He later wrote, "They kept staring at the sword. One asked if British Army issued medieval weapons as standard equipment. I told him yes. The psychological effect was profound." 9:28 a.m. warehouse district secured. Churchill's Group 3 had advanced through Vaagso's German positions in 40 minutes. Traditional commando tactics required 2 to 3 hours for similar objectives. The difference? Germans never established effective defensive positions because psychological shock prevented coordinated response. 10:15 a.m. German reinforcements arrived from the north. Feldwebel Klaus Schmidt led 23 men from the 181st Infantry Division's Reserve Company. They had received radio reports about British commandos in Vaagso. Standard enemy contact. Schmidt prepared his men for conventional combat. His unit entered the town from the North Road. Immediately encountered British troops. Schmidt organized defensive position behind a stone wall. His men established firing positions. By the book Wehrmacht defensive doctrine. Then they heard bagpipes. Schmidt later reported, "The sound was disorienting. Combat situations do not include music. My men were confused. Then we saw British soldiers advancing. One officer carried a large sword. We thought this was psychological deception. We maintained positions and prepared to fire." Churchill led the advance toward Schmidt's position. He had 60 meters to cover across open ground. German rifles were aimed. This should have been a slaughter. Churchill charged anyway. Schmidt, the officer, ran directly at our position with the sword. No covering fire, no tactical movement, just running and screaming. Several of my men fired. They missed. This should not be possible at 60 meters. But the sight of the sword affected their aim. The human brain cannot process a medieval weapon in a modern firefight. Churchill covered 40 meters before Germans adjusted their fire. Bullets impacted around him. He dove behind a destroyed vehicle. Group 3 advanced on his flanks, engaging the Germans with rifle fire. Germans returned fire. Standard firefight developing. But Churchill's charge had accomplished its purpose. Germans were focused on him. They expected him to remain in cover. He stood up and charged again, this time with Group 3 covering his advance. Schmidt. He kept coming, with the sword. My men began to panic. This was not training. This was not doctrine. One soldier said, "He cannot be killed." I ordered retreat. Churchill's men assaulted Schmidt's position. 8 Germans died. 15 retreated. Schmidt was captured. Churchill asked him, "Why did you retreat from a fortified position?" Schmidt, "The sword. We had no training for this." 11:45 a.m. HMS Kenya signaled withdrawal. German reinforcements from Bergen were en route. Time to evacuate. Churchill's Group 3 had destroyed 3 fish oil factories, sunk 4 German transport ships, killed 76 German soldiers, and captured 34 prisoners. Churchill was the last commando to board the landing craft. He stood on the beach holding his sword, watching the town burn. German survivors watched from destroyed positions. One German officer later wrote, "The British officer with the sword created more fear than anything in my Wehrmacht experience. We train to face modern weapons. We have no response to psychological terror." The landing craft pulled away at 12:03 a.m. Churchill cleaned his sword during the return voyage. It had blood on the blade from 11 confirmed kills. Morrison asked, "Do you think the sword actually worked, sir?" Churchill smiled. "The Germans are asking the same question. That's the point." HMS Kenya reached Scapa Flow at 6:30 a.m. December 27. Churchill reported to Lieutenant Colonel Durnford Slater, "Group 3 casualties? 7 wounded, 1 critical, 0 KIA. Durnford Slater stared. "You assaulted fortified positions for 6 hours and lost nobody?" "Germans froze when they saw the sword, sir. Standard Wehrmacht defensive doctrine has no procedures for close combat medieval weapons. The psychological impact was more effective than suppressive fire." Combined Operations Headquarters requested a full report. Churchill wrote, "Sword proved effective in creating cognitive disruption in enemy soldiers. German defenders consistently hesitated before engaging when confronted with archaic weapons. This 2 to 3 second delay provided tactical advantage during assault phases. Recommend expanding psychological warfare approaches in future commando operations." The captured German prisoners were interrogated. Consistent statements. British commandos were terrifying, unpredictable, and used weapons from the Middle Ages. One German NCO asked his interrogator, "Is this standard for British Special Forces?" The interrogator reported this to Combined Operations. The implication was clear. Germans feared what they could not understand. Churchill's after-action review generated intense debate at headquarters. Traditional officers called his approach theatrical nonsense and unnecessary risk. But the statistics were undeniable. Lowest casualty rate of any commando raid to date, maximum destruction of German facilities, complete psychological dominance. Lord Louis Mountbatten, Chief of Combined Operations, read Churchill's report and smiled. "This is exactly the innovation we need. Germans prepare for conventional warfare. We must be unconventional." Mountbatten authorized Churchill to train other commandos in psychological warfare techniques. "Teach them your methods. Make them understand that fear is a weapon." Churchill received the Military Cross for his actions at Vaagso. The citation mentioned exceptional leadership and aggressive tactics resulting in the destruction of strategic German installations. It did not mention the sword. That detail spread through unofficial channels. By January 1942, every commando unit in Britain had heard about Mad Jack Churchill and his medieval weapons. The legend was born. Churchill's psychological warfare approach spread through British commando units in early 1942, though officially, Combined Operations never endorsed medieval weapons as standard equipment. The technique spread commando to commando, unit to unit. The core principle was adopted: create cognitive disruption through unexpected tactics. February 1942. Captain Peter Young, No. 3 Commando, led a raid on Bruneval, France. He studied Churchill's reports and applied the principle differently. Instead of a sword, Young used aggressive verbal intimidation, screaming at Germans in fluent German while charging positions. Germans froze, confused by a British officer shouting Wehrmacht commands. Young's unit destroyed the German radar installation with 0 British casualties. March 1942. Operation Chariot, Saint-Nazaire, France. Commandos painted their landing craft to resemble German torpedo boats. They approached the harbor flying German naval flags while playing German military music over loudspeakers. German defenders waved them through. By the time Germans realized the deception, commandos were inside the harbor destroying the dry dock facilities. Churchill's lesson: exploit enemy expectations. Make them process something unexpected. April 1942. Churchill himself led a raid on Hardelot, France. This time he added another element. He played "The Road to the Isles" on his bagpipes while advancing. Germans heard music, saw a British officer playing an instrument during combat. Complete cognitive disruption. German defenders surrendered without significant resistance. Churchill wrote, "The enemy's primary weapon is trained response. Disrupt the training, you disrupt the weapon." By mid-1942, 53 commando officers had integrated psychological warfare elements into their tactics. Not all used swords or bagpipes. Some used aggressive vocal intimidation. Others used deceptive uniforms. Some used unexpected assault routes that violated tactical doctrine. The common element: forcing Germans to process something outside their training. That processing delay created tactical advantage. Wehrmacht defensive doctrine began adjusting. German training manuals from late 1942 included new sections: British Commando Unconventional Tactics and Maintaining Discipline During Psychological Attacks. The manual specifically mentioned British forces may use archaic weapons, loud music, or unexpected assault methods designed to create fear. Maintain defensive positions. Follow standard procedures regardless of enemy methods. But training updates could not eliminate the fundamental problem: the human brain's reaction to unexpected threats. A captured German report from August 1942 stated, "British commandos continue to employ tactics that contradict logical military doctrine. Soldiers report difficulty maintaining discipline when confronted with medieval weapons, music during assaults, or deceptive approaches. The psychological impact remains significant despite our training updates." Casualty statistics supported Churchill's approach. Commando raids employing psychological warfare techniques averaged 18% casualties through 1942. Traditional commando raids using standard infantry tactics averaged 34% casualties. Combined operations documented the difference, but never officially attributed it to psychological disruption. The official reports use phrases like innovative tactical approaches and aggressive leadership. Churchill's sword became symbolic. By 1943, multiple commando officers carried edged weapons, swords, axes, even one officer who carried a medieval morning star. The weapons themselves were less important than what they represented: the willingness to be unpredictable. Germans could not prepare for every possibility. That uncertainty created fear. Fear created hesitation. Hesitation created opportunity. Churchill proved that fear was measurable, exploitable, and more effective than firepower in close-quarters combat. Churchill survived the war. His last action was in Yugoslavia in May 1945, where he led a raid while carrying his sword and playing bagpipes during the assault. German forces in Yugoslavia surrendered 3 days later. Churchill joked, "If it wasn't for those damn Yankees, we could have kept the war going another 10 years." He transferred to the British Army's Parachute Regiment in 1946. Deployed to Palestine during the 1948 Mandate crisis. His aggressive methods remain controversial. Commanders appreciated results. Traditional officers called him reckless. Churchill retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1959. Post-war life was quiet. He returned to England, settling in Surrey. He taught himself to surf. At age 60, he became one of Britain's first surf instructors, teaching on the beaches of Devon. He built model steam engines. He restored a motorcycle. He never discussed his wartime service. Neighbors knew him as Jack, who surfed and built machines. They had no idea he had terrified the Wehrmacht. Churchill's psychological warfare methods influenced modern special forces doctrine. The SAS, formed in 1941, integrated principles of cognitive disruption into training. The American Delta Force studied British Commando tactics from World War II, including Churchill's approaches. Modern special operations emphasize unpredictability as a tactical advantage. Churchill proved the concept 70 years earlier with a sword. Historians estimate Churchill's techniques, as adopted by other commandos, contributed to saving approximately 800 to 1,200 British lives through reduced casualty rates in raids from 1942 to 1945. The exact figure is impossible to verify, but the statistical difference between conventional and psychological warfare raids is documented. Churchill died in 1996, age 89. His obituary in the Times mentioned his military cross. It mentioned his commando service. It mentioned his love of surfing. The sword was displayed at his funeral. Few people understood its significance. It represented the moment British special forces learned that fear was more effective than bullets. The claymore is now in the Imperial War Museum, a sword against machine guns, bagpipes in battle, medieval weapons creating modern tactical advantages. Churchill's story reveals a profound truth. Warfare is ultimately psychological. Technology matters less than the human brain's response to the unexpected. The Wehrmacht trained for predictable threats. Churchill gave them something unpredictable. One sword. 12 confirmed kills at Vaagso. 800 to 1,200 lives saved through reduced casualties across 3 years of commando operations. A psychological approach that influenced Special Forces doctrine for 80 years. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share. Comment below. What other unconventional World War II tactics should we cover? Thank you for watching. Remember those who fought with courage, creativity, and a willingness to terrify the enemy with a medieval sword.